There is a battle happening in your life right now. And it's not first in your bank account, not first in your family, not first in your body. It's in your mind. Because the enemy knows something many believers forget. If he can control your thoughts, he can control your direction. Your life will always move in the direction of your strongest thoughts. Some of you aren't losing because God isn't with you. You're losing because your thinking is still tied to your past, your pain, and your problems instead of tied to God's promises. You love God, but your mind still rehearses fear. You pray for breakthrough, but expect failure. You ask for peace, but meditate on worst-case scenarios. And you can't walk in victory while constantly agreeing with defeat in your head. That's why the prayer cannot just be, God, change my situation. The deeper prayer is, God, rewrite my thoughts and renew my mind. Because when God changes the way you think, he changes the way you live. Your mind is like a script, and many of us are living out lines that God never wrote. Lines like, I'm not good enough. I'll never change. My family will always be like this. Nothing good happens for me. But those lines didn't come from heaven. They came from hurt, from failure, from rejection, from what someone said when you were young, and you've been repeating them so long they sound like truth. But just because a thought is loud doesn't mean it's Lord. God wants to edit your internal dialogue. He wants to cross out lies and replace them with truth. Where the world wrote you're stuck, God writes you're growing. Where fear wrote what if it goes wrong, God writes what if it goes right, because I'm with you. Where shame wrote you're disqualified, grace writes you're forgiven and still called. Renewing your mind is not a one-time event. It's a daily exchange. You have to wake up and decide whose voice gets the microphone in your head, because your mind will preach to you all day long. The question is it preaching faith or fear? You cannot stop thoughts from coming, but you can stop them from staying. Every thought has to go through a spiritual security check. Does this line up with what God says about me? If not, it doesn't get to live in your head rent-free. When God renews your mind, problems may still exist, but panic loses its power. Storms may still come, but they don't define you. Why? Because you no longer interpret life through trauma, you interpret it through truth. And truth stabilizes you when emotions try to shake you. A renewed mind also changes how you see yourself. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances and start seeing yourself as a child of God with authority, purpose, and assignment. You don't just survive days. You step into them with expectation. And here's the beautiful part. When your mind changes, your reactions change. When reactions change, relationships change. When relationships change, environments change. All because God started with your thinking. So don't just ask God to open doors. Ask him to rewire your thoughts. Don't just pray for a new season. Pray for a new mindset. Because the greatest miracle God may do in your life is not around you. It's within you. Lord, rewrite what pain wrote. Erase what fear wrote. Correct what the enemy wrote. And let my mind agree with heaven. Most people think their greatest struggles are happening around them, but the truth is the most intense battles are happening within them. Long before a problem shows up in your life, it shows up in your mind. Long before defeat appears in your circumstances, it first takes shape in your thoughts. That's because the mind is the command center of your life. Whatever controls your thinking will eventually influence your choices, your emotions, and your direction. If the enemy can shape how you think, he doesn't have to force your future. You will walk into it on your own. You can be in a good environment and still live a defeated life if your mind is full of defeat. You can be surrounded by opportunity and still expect failure if your thoughts are trained to anticipate loss. That's why two people can go through the same situation and come out with completely different outcomes. One sees a setback and thinks, this is the end. The other sees the same setback and thinks, this is a setup for something greater. The difference isn't the circumstance. The difference is the mindset. Your mind interprets everything before you experience it emotionally. If your thoughts say, I can't handle this, anxiety steps in. If your thoughts say, I'm not enough, insecurity takes over. If your thoughts say, nothing will change, hopelessness grows. Thoughts are not harmless. They are seeds. And every seed, if entertained long enough, produces a harvest in your life. That's why the battlefield is not first financial, physical, or relational. It is mental. The enemy aims for your mind because he knows if he can get you to believe the wrong things, you will live the wrong way. If he can convince you that you are powerless, you will stop trying. If he can convince you that God has forgotten you, you will stop trusting. If he can convince you that your past defines you, you will never step into your future. What makes this battle so intense is that it's constant. You don't get a day off from your thoughts. From the moment you wake up, your mind starts talking. It reminds you of yesterday's mistakes, tomorrow's worries, today's pressures. It replays conversations, imagines worst-case scenarios, and magnifies problems. If you don't take authority over your thoughts, they will take authority over you. The mind is powerful because it shapes perception, and perception shapes reality. If you perceive yourself as a failure, you will avoid risks that could lead to success. If you perceive people as against you, you will build walls instead of relationships. If you perceive challenges as impossible, you will quit before you even begin. Your life will move in the direction your mind points it. This is why spiritual growth must include mental transformation. You can attend services, listen to messages, and say prayers, but if your thinking remains unchanged, your life will stay stuck in the same patterns. You cannot consistently live beyond the level of your thoughts. Victory on the outside begins with truth on the inside. The battle in the mind is also about agreement. Every day, thoughts knock at the door of your mind asking for permission to stay. Fear asks to move in. Doubt wants a room. Shame tries to set up residence. But you have the authority to decide which thoughts get to stay and which ones must leave. Just because a thought enters your mind doesn't mean it belongs there. Winning the battle of the mind means learning to recognize the source of your thoughts. Are they pushing you toward faith or pulling you into fear? Are they reminding you of God's promises or replaying your past failures? The mind will always follow what you repeatedly focus on. Whatever you meditate on grows stronger. When you begin to guard your mind, you change the course of your life. You stop being driven by every emotion and start being anchored by truth. You stop reacting out of panic and start responding with purpose. You stop assuming the worst and start expecting God to work even in difficulty. The battlefield may still exist, but you are no longer fighting unarmed. You fight with truth, with faith, and with the confidence that your mind does not have to be a place of chaos. It can become a place of strength. Not every thought that enters your mind has the right to stay there, and not every thought you think is coming from a place of truth. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that because a thought feels real, it must be true. But feelings can be influenced by fear, past wounds, and wrong beliefs. Your mind can replay lies so often that they start to sound like facts. That's why you cannot accept every thought as if it carries authority. Some thoughts are planned, tagged by past experiences. A failure from years ago can whisper, "You always mess things up." A rejection can echo, "You're not wanted." A painful season can convince you nothing good lasts. Those thoughts don't come from heaven, they come from hurt. Yet if left unchecked, they shape how you see yourself and your future. You begin to make decisions based on old pain instead of present truth. Other thoughts are rooted in fear. Fear has a way of creating stories that haven't even happened. It says, what if this goes wrong? What if you lose? What if you're not enough? Fear speaks in possibilities, but presents them as guarantees. It paints negative outcomes so vividly that you start preparing for disaster instead of expecting growth. When fear-filled thoughts dominate your mind, They drain your peace and paralyze your progress. There are also thoughts born from comparison. When you constantly measure your life against others, your mind starts writing scripts like, you're behind, you're not as gifted, you'll never reach that level. Comparison distorts reality. It hides your strengths and magnifies your insecurities. It makes you forget that your journey, timing, and purpose are unique. Those thoughts don't push you forward, they trap you in self-doubt. Then there are thoughts tied to shame. Shame constantly brings up your past and tries to define you by your worst moments. It says, after what you did, you can't move forward. You don't deserve better. You'll always be that person. Shame is heavy because it attaches identity to mistakes. But mistakes are events, not identities. When you allow shame-based thoughts to stay, they keep you from embracing forgiveness, growth, teach, and new beginnings. The problem is not that these thoughts show up. The problem is when you agree with them. Agreement gives thoughts power. The moment you say, that's just how I am, you lock yourself into a mindset that limits change. When you say, I'll never overcome this, you close the door on possibility. Agreement turns passing thoughts into personal beliefs, and beliefs shape the course of your life. You have to learn to question your thoughts instead of automatically believing them. When a thought says, you're not capable, ask who says. When a thought says, it's too late, ask, is that truth or fear talking? Many thoughts lose their power when examined. Lies depend on being accepted without challenge. Truth stands firm even under inspection. Your mind is like a gate and you are the gatekeeper. Thoughts knock, but you decide which ones enter and settle. If a thought does not align with truth, hope, and growth, it does not deserve space in your mind. Entertaining the wrong thoughts is like watering weeds. They grow quickly and choke out the good seeds meant to flourish in your life. Replacing wrong thoughts requires intention. You can't just remove lies. You must replace them with truth. If you only try to stop negative thinking without filling your mind with what is right, the same patterns return. The mind always holds on to something. When you fill it with truth about who you are, where you're going, and what is possible, lies start losing their grip. Recognizing that not every thought comes from a healthy or truthful place gives you freedom. It means you are not defined by every idea that crosses your mind. You are not your worst thought. You are not your loudest fear. Thoughts may visit, but they do not get to rule unless you hand them control. Renewing your mind doesn't happen automatically, and it doesn't happen by accident. It is a daily decision, a consistent exchange where you trade old patterns of thinking for new ones rooted in truth. Many people want to change life, but they don't realize that a changed life begins with a changed mind, and a changed mind is built through daily choices. You cannot think the same way every day and expect a different future. Transformation requires participation. Every morning your mind wakes up carrying leftovers from yesterday. Conversations, disappointments, pressures, and fears try to reload themselves the moment you open your eyes. If you don't intentionally reset your thinking, your day will be shaped by whatever emotions or worries were waiting for you. That's why renewing the mind is not something you do once during an emotional moment. It is something you practice every single day. A daily exchange means you don't let your thoughts run on autopilot. Autopilot thinking usually leads back to familiar worries, old insecurities, and negative expectations. The brain follows paths it has traveled before. If you've spent years thinking, I'm not good enough, your mind will naturally return to that thought unless you actively interrupt it. Renewal requires awareness. You have to notice what you're thinking and decide whether it deserves to stay. This exchange also requires replacing, not just removing. You cannot simply tell yourself, stop thinking negatively and expect lasting change. The mind does not function well in a vacuum. When you remove a thought, you replace it with something stronger and truer. When fear says, you're going to fail, renewal says, I can learn, grow, and handle what comes. When doubt says, You don't have what it takes. Renewal answers, I am developing and I don't have to be perfect to move forward. Consistency is what gives renewal its power. One positive thought today cannot cancel years of negative conditioning. But daily deposits of truth begin to build a new mental foundation. Just like physical exercise strengthens muscles over time, mental renewal strengthens your inner resilience. You may not feel the difference immediately, but with repetition, your responses begin to change. Things that once overwhelmed you no longer control you as easily. A daily exchange also involves guarding what enters your mind. What you listen to, watch, and focus on feeds your thinking. If you constantly consume negativity, comparison, and fear-based messages, those thoughts will multiply. Renewal requires being intentional about what you allow to shape your perspective. Your environment influences your mindset, so you must choose inputs that encourage growth, hope, and clarity. There will be days when old thoughts try to come back stronger. Stressful situations often trigger familiar patterns. In those moments, renewal means pausing instead of reacting. It means asking yourself, is this thought helping me or hurting me? That pause creates space to choose differently. Instead of spiraling into worry, you ground yourself in what is true right now. Instead of assuming the worst, you remain open to better possibilities. This daily exchange is not about pretending problems don't exist. It's about choosing how you interpret them. Renewal allows you to face challenges without letting them define you. You acknowledge reality, but you don't surrender your peace to it. Your mind becomes a place where solutions are considered, lessons are learned, and hope remains alive even in difficulty. Over time, this practice reshapes your inner dialogue. The voice that once criticized you becomes more encouraging. The thoughts that once rushed to worst-case scenarios begin to look for growth opportunities. You start responding with intention instead of impulse. That is the power of daily renewal. Small, consistent decisions that gradually transform how you think, how you feel, and how you live. The way you see yourself determines the way you live your life. If your mind has been shaped by failure, rejection, or constant criticism, you begin to build an identity around those experiences. You stop seeing events as things that happen and start seeing them as definitions of who you are. Instead of saying, I failed, you quietly start believing, I am a failure. Instead of recognizing that you were rejected in a moment, you begin to think, I am unwanted. That shift from event to identity is where damage happens. And it all begins in the mind. When your mind is not renewed, you carry a distorted image of yourself. You may have gifts, potential, and purpose, but you filter everything through insecurity. Opportunities feel intimidating instead of exciting. Compliments feel uncomfortable instead of encouraging. You downplay your strengths and magnify your weaknesses. You talk yourself out of chances before you even try. Not because you lack ability, but because you lack the belief that why? Oh, you are capable. A renewed mind begins to rebuild identity from the inside out. It separates who you are from what you've been through. Your mistakes become lessons, not labels. Your past becomes a chapter, not the title of your story. You begin to understand that growth is part of the journey and that imperfection does not disqualify you from moving forward. This shift changes how you stand, how you speak, and how you step into new situations. When your identity is shaped by truth rather than fear, you stop shrinking to fit into spaces that were never meant to limit you. You no longer feel the need to prove your worth through constant performance. You stop chasing validation from people who cannot define your value. Instead, you move with a quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are becoming. This doesn't mean arrogance, it means security. You are no longer easily shaken by opinions because your sense of self is anchored deeper than approval. A renewed identity also changes how you handle challenges. If you see yourself as weak, every obstacle feels overwhelming. But when you begin to see yourself as someone who can learn, adapt, and grow, challenges become part of development rather than proof of inadequacy. You don't avoid hard things, you approach them knowing that struggle can strengthen you. Your mindset shifts from, I can't handle this, to, I will grow through this. This transformation affects your relationships as well. When you don't see your own value, you tolerate treatment that reinforces your negative beliefs. You accept less than you deserve because you think that's all you're worth. But as your mind is renewed and your identity becomes healthy, your standards change. You begin to set boundaries. You communicate with clarity. You stop seeking to be chosen by everyone and instead choose environments and connections that align with who you are becoming. Your inner dialogue becomes kinder and more constructive. Instead of constantly criticizing yourself, you start speaking to yourself with patience. You acknowledge areas where you need growth without condemning yourself. This internal shift creates emotional stability. You are less reactive because your worth no longer feels threatened by every mistake or disagreement. Seeing yourself differently also influences your sense of purpose. When your identity is rooted in insecurity, you play small. You hesitate to step into roles that require responsibility or visibility. But when your mind is renewed, you begin to believe that your life has meaning beyond survival. You recognize that your experiences, strengths, and even your struggles have shaped you for something significant. That awareness gives you courage to move forward even when you feel stretched. A renewed mind doesn't create a fake version of you. It reveals a healthier, truer version that was buried under fear and false beliefs. You still have areas to grow, but you no longer see growth as proof of failure. You see it as evidence that you are alive, learning, and moving forward with a clearer understanding of who you are. The way you think never stays contained in your mind. Thoughts always travel outward into words, actions, habits, and eventually into the overall direction of your life. That's why when thinking changes, life begins to change. It may not be dramatic at first. It may not look like instant transformation. But subtle shifts in thought patterns create powerful shifts in daily living. And over time, those small internal adjustments lead to visible external results. Every action you take is first approved by your mind. Before you speak, you think. Before you try, you decide whether it's worth it. Before you quit, you convince yourself that stopping makes sense. If your thoughts are filled with doubt, you will hesitate. If your thoughts are filled with fear, you will avoid risks. If your thoughts are filled with negativity, you will expect the worst and often act in ways that create it. But when your thinking begins to shift toward truth, hope, and possibility, your behavior starts to follow. A new way of thinking changes how you respond to pressure. Instead of reacting immediately out of emotion, you pause. That pause is powerful. It gives you space to choose a response instead of being controlled by impulse. Where you once reacted with anger, you begin to respond with calm. Where you once panicked, you begin to think clearly. This doesn't mean you no longer feel emotions. It means your emotions no longer lead your decisions. Your mind becomes a filter, not a battlefield of chaos. As your reactions change, your relationships start to shift. Many conflicts are not caused by circumstances alone, but by interpretations. When your thinking is negative, you assume bad intentions. You take things personally. You expect to be misunderstood or hurt. But when your mindset becomes healthier, you communicate with more clarity and less defensiveness. You listen more. You give others room to grow just as you are growing. This creates stronger connections and fewer unnecessary tensions. Changed thinking also influences your habits. If you believe your efforts matter, you are more likely to stay consistent. If you believe growth is possible, you won't give up after one setback. Your mindset becomes the fuel behind discipline. You begin to make choices that align with where you want to go rather than how you feel in the moment. Small daily decisions, getting up, trying again, learning something new, begin to compound. Over time, these habits shape a different lifestyle. Your environment begins to respond to your internal changes. When you carry a mindset of hope and purpose, you bring a different energy into spaces. You become less drained by negativity and more focused on solutions. People notice the difference. Opportunities often connect with those who carry confidence and clarity. This is not about pretending everything is perfect. It's about approaching life with a mindset that looks for growth even in difficulty. Even challenges begin to serve a new role in your life. With renewed thinking, problems are no longer immediate proof that things are falling apart. They become situations to learn from. You ask better questions. What can I gain from this? What is this teaching me? That perspective reduces stress and increases resilience. You bounce back quicker because your mind is not stuck in defeat. As these changes continue, your overall direction shifts. You start making decisions based on long-term purpose instead of short-term emotion. You become more intentional with your time, your words, and your energy. The person you are becoming on the inside starts shaping the path you walk on the outside. Others may not see an internal battle. You fought to change your thinking, but they will see the fruit of it in your stability, your growth, and your consistency. Life transformation rarely starts with a sudden external miracle. More often, it begins quietly in the mind, where new thoughts replace old patterns. Those thoughts guide new choices. Those choices build new habits, and those habits create a different future. When thinking changes, the course of life gradually follows in the same direction. Peace is not the absence of problems, it is the presence of stability in the middle of them. And that stability is deeply connected to the condition of your mind. When your thinking is unguarded, every issue feels bigger than it is. Small inconveniences feel like major threats. Delays feel like disasters. Uncertainty feels unbearable. But when your mind is anchored in truth, challenges may still come, yet they don't have the same power to shake you. A guarded, renewed mind becomes a place of refuge rather than a place of constant panic. Your mind is where situations are interpreted before they are experienced emotionally. Two people can face the same storm, but one collapses under anxiety while the other remains steady. The difference is not always the severity of the situation, it is the perspective they carry into it. When your thoughts automatically go to worst-case scenarios, your body reacts with stress, your emotions spiral, and your energy drains quickly. But when your thinking is grounded, you create room to respond instead of react. A stable mind does not ignore reality, it frames reality differently. Instead of thinking, this is too much for me, you begin to think, this is difficult. I can take it one step at a time. That shift may seem small, but it changes everything. One thought leads to overwhelm, the other leads to endurance. Your mind becomes the difference between breaking down and pushing through. Guarding your mind means being selective about what you dwell on. Problems will present themselves, but you do not have to replay them endlessly. When you keep rehearsing what could go wrong, your stress multiplies. Your imagination begins to work against you, creating fears that may never materialize. A renewed mind learns to notice the problem without magnifying it beyond its true size. It acknowledges the issue, but refuses to let it dominate every thought. This kind of mental stability allows you to make wiser decisions under pressure. When your thoughts are racing, decisions are often driven by emotion, not clarity. You say things you regret. You act in ways that complicate situations. But when your mind is steady, you slow down. You consider consequences. You seek understanding before reacting. That calm thinking protects you from making temporary problems into permanent damage. A renewed mind also changes how you handle uncertainty. Much anxiety comes not from what is happening, but from what might happen. The future becomes a source of fear because the mind fills in blanks with negative assumptions. Stability in thinking means accepting that you cannot control everything, but you can control how you respond. Instead of demanding certainty, You learn to move forward with trust, patience, and focus on what you can do today. Emotional resilience grows from this mental discipline. You still feel disappointment, frustration, and sadness, but those emotions no longer control the direction of your life. They become signals, not rulers. You can experience a hard moment without letting it define the entire day. You can go through a setback without concluding that everything is ruined. Your mind learns to separate temporary feelings from lasting truth. Over time, this inner steadiness becomes part of your character. Others begin to notice that you handle stress differently. You are not easily pulled into drama. You do not panic at every challenge. This does not mean you are detached. It means you are anchored. Your mind has become a place of strength, where truth speaks louder than fear and where perspective protects your peace. When your mind is guarded and renewed, life's storms still come, but they no longer have permission to overthrow you. Instead of living in constant reaction, you live with intention. Instead of being ruled by circumstances, you stand firm within them, carrying a quiet confidence that no situation has the final say over your inner stability. Peace is not the absence of problems. It is the presence of stability in the middle of them. And that stability is deeply connected to the condition of your mind. When your thinking is unguarded, every issue feels bigger than it is. Small inconveniences feel like major threats. Delays feel like disasters. Uncertainty feels unbearable. But when your mind is anchored in truth, challenges may still come, yet they don't have the same power to shake you. A guarded, renewed mind becomes a place of refuge rather than a place of constant panic. Your mind is where situations are interpreted before they are experienced emotionally. Two people can face the same storm, but one collapses under anxiety while the other remains steady. The difference is not always the severity of the situation, it is the perspective they carry into it. When your thoughts automatically go to worst-case scenarios, your body reacts with stress, your emotions spiral, and your energy drains quickly. But when your thinking is grounded, you create room to respond instead of react. A stable mind does not ignore reality. It frames reality differently. Instead of thinking, this is too much for me, you begin to think this is difficult, but I can take it one step at a time. That shift may seem small, but it changes everything. One thought leads to overwhelm, the other leads to endurance. Your mind becomes the difference between breaking down and pushing through. Guarding your mind means being selective about what you dwell on. Problems will present themselves, but you do not have to replay them endlessly. When you keep rehearsing what could go wrong, your stress multiplies. Your imagination begins to work against you, creating fears that may never materialize. A renewed mind learns to notice the problem without magnifying it beyond its true size. It acknowledges the issue, but refuses to let it dominate every thought. This kind of mental stability allows you to make wiser decisions under pressure. When your thoughts are racing, decisions are often driven by emotion, not clarity. You say things you regret. You act in ways that complicate situations. But when your mind is steady, you slow down. You consider consequences. You seek understanding before reacting. That calm thinking protects you from making temporary problems into permanent damage. A renewed mind also changes how you handle uncertainty. Much anxiety comes not from what is happening, but from what might happen. The future becomes a source of fear because the mind fills in blanks with negative assumptions. Stability in thinking means accepting that you cannot control everything, but you can control how you respond. Instead of demanding certainty, you learn to move forward with trust, patience, and focus on what you can do today. Emotional resilience grows from this mental discipline. You still feel disappointment, frustration, and sadness, but those emotions no longer control the direction of your life. They become signals, not rulers. You can experience a hard moment without letting it define the entire day. You can go through a setback without concluding that everything is ruined. Your mind learns to separate temporary feelings from lasting truth. Over time, this inner steadiness becomes part of your character. Others begin to notice that you handle stress differently. You are not easily pulled into drama. You do not panic at every challenge. This does not mean you are detached. It means you are anchored. Your mind has become a place of strength, where truth speaks louder than fear and where perspective protects your peace. When your mind is guarded and renewed, life's storms still come, but they no longer have permission to overthrow you. Instead of living in constant reaction, you live with intention. Instead of being ruled by circumstances, you stand firm within them, carrying a quiet confidence that no situation has the final say over your inner stability.